Side by side in the saddle, no better place for a cowboy and his girl. The morning I rode into Cutter's Bend, I had $43 in my vest pocket, a Winchester that needed a new extractor spring, and a letter from the town council that promised order had broken down so badly they'd buried 2 lawmen in 6 weeks. I folded the letter back into quarters and tucked it in my shirt. That's the thing people don't understand about a man who does what I do. They think it's about the gun. It isn't. It's about the decision you make before you ever touch it, the one where you look at the situation square and say, this is the shape of it, and then you work the shape. That's all it ever was, work the shape. Cutter's Bend had a shape all right. I could see it from the ridge before I even came down into the valley. The way the cattle pens sat idle on a Tuesday. The way the main street had boards over 2 storefronts that shouldn't have needed boarding. The way 3 men on horseback moved along the far edge of town in a loose, proprietary arc, like they were counting something that belonged to them. I watched them for a while from up there on that ridge, the wind coming out of the northwest and cold for September. My horse, a gray gelding I'd had 6 years, stood still under me. He'd learned early that when I stopped and got quiet, there was a reason to stand still. I came down into town at a walk. The man who'd written me was named Aldous Heck. He ran the feed store, which meant he ran most of what mattered: grain, seed, harness leather, the credit lines that kept ranchers from going under between seasons. Small man, wire-rimmed glasses, a handshake like a man who'd worked hard his whole life and stopped recently and was embarrassed about it. He met me at the livery and didn't waste my time. Briggs family, he said. Father and 3 sons. They got here 4 years ago with money and they've been spending it on men with guns ever since. We had a town marshal named Purcell who lasted 3 weeks before they shot him off his horse outside the telegraph office. His replacement made it 41 days. He paused. I wrote to 6 men. You're the only one who wrote back. I said, what's the town prepared to do for itself? He looked at me. Most people in that situation expect you to reassure them. I don't do that. Some, he said after a moment. Not a lot. There's the Garver brothers, they're steady, and the blacksmith Noonan, he's not afraid, a few others. And the rest? Scared, he said, which is fair. It is, I said. I asked him where I could get a meal and a room, and he pointed me toward the Meridian House, which was the only hotel still operating in town. The other one, he said, the Briggs family had bought and turned into an arrangement for their men. I thanked him and led my horse down the street, and that's when I saw her. She was on the porch of the Meridian House with a ledger open across her knees and a pencil tucked behind her ear, and she was arguing with a man in a canvas duster about the price of a room. Not loudly, not pleading. She was laying it out to him in a tone that suggested she'd already calculated exactly how this ended and was content to wait for him to catch up. 40 cents a night, Mr. Tillys, she said. Same as last month and the month before. If that's changed to you, you can write the difference on a piece of paper and I'll consider it. The man, Tillys, was bigger than her by a considerable margin, and he knew it and was leaning into that knowledge the way men do when they've run out of argument. She didn't shift. The pencil stayed behind her ear. He left. She watched him go without expression, then looked down at her ledger and made a note. I tied my horse at the rail and went up the 3 steps to the porch, and she looked up. And I'll tell you what I noticed first. She was tired. Not in a way she'd let show to a stranger, but I've spent enough years watching people to see it in the set of someone's shoulders, in the particular stillness around the eyes. She was carrying something heavy, and she'd been carrying it for a while. Room, I said. 40 cents a night, $1.50 the week. She looked at me the way a woman running a hotel in a town with a problem looks at a man carrying a rifle and a marshal's commission, taking stock. Week, I said, and handed her the $1.50. She took it, wrote something in the ledger, and said, Number 6, top of the stairs, second door on the right. Supper's at 6 if you want it. Breakfast is at 5:30. The kitchen closes, not negotiable. She paused. You're Calloway. Yes. Aldous told me you were coming. Another pause, shorter. I'm Marin Dahl. I own this place. She said it the way people say the thing they've had to say too many times and have gotten used to saying and are a little tired of having to say, not bitter, just plain. My husband built it. He died 2 winters ago. I kept it. Good hotel, I said, which was the truth. Whatever else was wrong with Cutter's Bend, the Meridian House was clean and straight and properly kept. Something shifted in her face, just briefly. The way something shifts when a thing you've worked hard to maintain gets noticed. "Go get your horse settled," she said. "Supper's at 6. I had the town shaped in my mind by the end of that first day. I walked it slow, stopped where a man stops, at the well at the barber's, in front of the boarded-up windows of what had been a hardware store. Talked to who'd talk. Listened to what people said and what they didn't say, because those are different and both of them matter. The Briggs operation was what I'd expected. Old Harlan Briggs had come out of somewhere in Missouri with money he hadn't made ranching and bought himself the biggest spread in the valley, and then started behaving like the valley belonged to him as part of the arrangement. His sons, Decker, Clay, and the youngest one they called Foley, were the instrument of that belief. They ran their men through town on a rotation, loose and slow, which was the point. The presence was the message. Any merchant who wanted to reduce the frequency of that message paid for the reduction in one form or another. The two marshals hadn't died because they were unlucky. They'd died because they'd tried to make something happen before they understood the shape. You come into a situation like Cutter's Bend and reach for the obvious end too fast, you end up getting handed to you instead. I didn't reach. I moved into number 6 upstairs in the Meridian house, and I let the first week go by like I wasn't in any hurry about anything. That was its own kind of work. Marindal made biscuits that were better than they had any right to be given the circumstances, and she ran supper at a long table in the back room with whoever was staying in the hotel, plus the 3 or 4 local men who'd formed a habit of eating there. Aldous Heck was one of them. Noonan the blacksmith was another, a man shaped like a barrel who ate with focused attention and didn't waste words. I ate at that table every night that first week. Didn't say much. Mostly I was watching how the room worked, who came, who didn't, what people talked about and how they talked about it. What I noticed was that Marindal ran that table the same way she ran the hotel. No performance, no fuss. She put food down and she sat when she sat and she listened more than she talked, and when she talked it was to the point. If someone said something stupid, she let it breathe for exactly as long as it needed to, and then she said the thing that clarified it, and there was never any meanness in it, just the fact. People around that table trusted her. I could see it in how they sat, a little easier when she was in the room. Third night I was there, Aldous Heck was going back and forth about whether the town could raise enough money to bring in a second gun for backup. And Marin, who'd been quiet through most of it, looked up from her plate and said, "That's the wrong question." Everybody looked at her. "The question," she said, "is what we're willing to do ourselves. If we're waiting for someone else to solve this, we've already told Harlan Briggs something he shouldn't know." Silence around the table. Then Noonan said, "She's right." I thought so too. I didn't say anything. But I looked at her, and she happened to look at me at the same moment, and there was something in that, just the recognition between two people who have looked at the same thing and arrived at the same place. She went back to her plate. I went back to mine. The shape of it came clear in the second week. Harlan Briggs was the head, but he was old and careful. Decker was the one who wanted to move fast and had bad judgment about when. Clay was the smart one, which made him the dangerous one. Foley, the youngest, was following whoever was loudest on any given day. Crack Clay's certainty, and the whole structure wobbled. The instrument was money, as it usually is. They'd been running a tax, that's the polite word they used in conversation, though the word I'd use is different on the grain shipments coming into Heck's feed store. A percentage off every wagon, paid in cash at a point on the road 3 miles east of town. 2 of Briggs's men with rifles in a draw, very organized. I rode out that road early one morning and sat on the ridge above the draw for 2 hours. Watched the men, watched the timing, watched the road in both directions. Then I rode back to town. That evening after supper, I asked Aldous Heck to give me a list of every shipment scheduled to come in over the next 3 weeks. He gave it to me without asking why, which told me he'd decided to trust me, which was its own kind of weight to carry. What came next took 8 days, and I'm not going to tell it all in detail because most of it was patience and positioning, and the 8 days aren't the story. The story is what happened when it was over. I'll say this much. I worked with Noonan and the Garver brothers and 2 other men from town, and I worked the shape instead of fighting the obvious fight. And by the end of the 8th day, the Briggs men who were going to be smart had left the county, and the ones who weren't smart were in a situation where they had to reconsider. Decker Briggs was in a jail cell in the county seat, facing a federal charge that Clay Briggs's money wasn't going to reach. Clay himself was under a circumstance I'd arranged through a letter to a U.S. Marshal in Amarillo, and he was occupied with that and would be occupied with it for a long time. Harlan Briggs was still on his ranch, but he was old and he'd lost his instrument, and the shape of the thing had changed around him. It wasn't theatrical, it was just work. The morning it was finished, the morning I rode back into Cutter's Bend, having been out 2 days and knowing it was done, I was wrung out in a way I didn't feel in my body so much as somewhere behind my eyes. That particular kind of tired that comes at the end of a thing when you've been holding yourself at a certain pitch for a long time, and then you don't have to anymore. I rode in on my gray through the early morning, nobody on the street yet, and put the horse up at the livery, and then I just stood there for a minute in the smell of hay and horses and let the quiet happen. My hands weren't shaking. They never shake. But there's a moment after where you just need to stand still and be done. Then I walked to the Meridian house. The kitchen light was on. She was in there already starting breakfast, which was what she did at 5 o'clock every morning of her life. I came in through the back and she turned from the stove and looked at me and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked. The way you look at a man when you're trying to confirm something you've been waiting to confirm. "It's done," I said. She nodded. She'd known, I think, from the moment I came through the door. There's something about a man who's completed a thing different from a man who's still in the middle of one. "Sit down," she said. "Coffee's ready." I sat at the kitchen table, which was a small table, a working table, not the supper table, just a place to stand while you sorted through the morning's problems. She put a cup down in front of me and sat across. We didn't talk for a bit. The fire in the stove was working, and the kitchen was warm against the September cold outside. Then she said, "Aldous is going to want to give you a ceremony." "No." She looked at me and the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something quieter than that. "I told him you'd say that. He's going to do it anyway. He can do what he wants." She turned her cup in her hands. She had good hands, square, capable, used to work. After a moment she said, "You didn't have to come back here." "It's where I'm staying." "That's not what I mean," she said at level, looking at the cup. I knew what she meant. I didn't say anything. "I've watched you these 2 weeks," she said. "The way you work, the way you think. You came in here and you looked at this town like it was a problem that had a solution, and you found the solution." She stopped. "People don't do that, not here. Not without they find a solution to the thing in front of them and they don't see the rest of it. You saw all of it." I said, "You saw all of it." "That night at supper when you said the wrong question." She looked up. "You were right," I said. "About what we were willing to do ourselves. That's what it came down to. That's what it always comes down to." A pause. "I've been running this hotel for 2 years," she said, "and everyone in this town is grateful for it, and nobody has ever once said I was right about a thing." She said it matter-of-factly, not with any bitterness, just as information. "They appreciate the biscuits. They appreciate the room. Nobody asks what I think." "I'm asking," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the fire. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're going to leave when you're paid and this town is going to go back to being what it was before, which is a little small and not entirely steady, and in 6 months there might be another situation. I think you know that." She paused. "And I think you're tired of it, not the work, the being alone in it." The word landed flat and true, the way the right words do. I looked down at my cup. $43, I said. "That's what I came in with." She waited. "I've got the council's fee on top of that now, enough to do something with. I've been thinking about a piece of land a man told me about northwest of here in a valley where the grass comes in good. Small operation. Horses, mostly." I turned the cup. "I'm not as young as I was." "No," she said, "but you're not old. Old enough to be tired of the trail." She was quiet for a while, then she said, "I have a hotel." "I know. I'm not leaving it." "I know that too." She looked at me straight and said, "The valley you're talking about, northwest, a beat. That's maybe an hour's ride." 40 minutes, I said, "if you know the way." Something settled in her face. Not soft, she wasn't a soft woman. Something more like ease, like a thing that had been held at tension for a long time releasing to its proper position. She stood up and went back to the stove. Breakfast in half an hour, she said. Go wash up. I'll tell you what I remember from that winter. The smell of the Meridian house kitchen on cold mornings. The ledger she kept open on the side table, and sometimes showed me when there was something in the numbers she wanted another set of eyes on. The way she'd knock twice, flat-knuckled, on the doorframe of whatever room I was in when she had something to say. The ride northwest, the first time I took her out to see the land. She sat her horse well, better than most, and she looked out at that grass valley with the same expression she had when she looked at a ledger page that balanced right. It's good land, she said. Yes. You'd need a good water source for horses. There's a creek about a quarter-mile west. She nodded slow, still looking out at the grass. The wind moved her hair. I watched her take the measure of it the way she took the measure of everything. Not hasty, not romantic about it, just looking at it for what it was and deciding. Then she looked at me. I don't know how to say it exactly. It wasn't a grand thing. She didn't say anything in that moment. She just looked at me the way you look at something you've decided about, clear and steady, like I was worth looking at, like she'd calculated the whole thing and arrived at a number she trusted. Nobody had looked at me like that in a very long time, maybe ever. I didn't say anything either. We just sat on our horses in the cold September wind above that grass valley, and then we rode back to town. The land transaction took a month. Aldous Heck did give me a ceremony in the end, a dinner more like, at the Meridian house, the long supper table with everyone who'd been part of the thing, and some who hadn't, and several jars of something a rancher named Pullam made out on his place that was better than it had any right to be. There were speeches. I let them happen. Noonan clapped me on the shoulder so hard I felt it in my back teeth and grinned at me like we'd known each other 20 years. Marin sat at the other end of the table. She didn't make a speech. She wasn't that kind of woman. But once, across the noise and the lamplight and the jars of Pullam's operation, she looked at me and lifted her cup. I lifted mine. First horse I put on that land was a bay mare, 14-2, good legs, steady disposition. I called her November because that's when I brought her out there. Built the first paddock with my own hands that fall, the posts setting crooked in frozen ground, taking twice as long as it should have. I didn't mind. Every Thursday, Marin rode out. We'd eat whatever I'd managed to put together, which was not in the category of her biscuits, and then we'd ride the property and she'd ask questions about what I was planning, and I'd answer them, and sometimes she'd say she thought I should consider doing it a different way, and sometimes she was right, and I told her so. I told her so more often than I'd told anyone anything in years. By spring, there were 4 horses and a structure that was beginning to look like an actual operation, and the town of Cutter's Bend had settled into the quiet of a place where the shape of things was right. Not perfect. Nowhere is perfect, but right enough that people could get on with their lives, which is all you're ever trying to do. One Thursday in April, she rode out and we ate and walked the fence line, and she stopped at the northwest corner where I'd run a new line of posts, and she put her hand on the top post and looked out at the mare and the 3 other horses moving in the spring light, and she said, "It's coming along." Slowly, I said. "That's how things come along," she said, "if they're going to hold." I looked at her hand on the post, her good, square, capable hand. "Marin," I said. She looked at me. I don't have a speech in me, never have. What I said was, "I'd like this to be yours too." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at me, taking my measure, the way she always did, clear, without flattery, without reducing it to something smaller than it was. Then she said, "I have a hotel." "I know. And a ledger that needs attention 3 mornings a week at minimum." "I can ride." 40 minutes, she said, "if you know the way." "Less now," I said. "I know the way." She turned and looked back at the horses in the field. The light was coming in low and gold across the grass, the way it does in April in that country, as if the land itself is relieved winter let go. She said, "You'll have to help me plant a kitchen garden here. I won't ride 40 minutes for vegetables." "Done," I said. She nodded once. Then she reached out and took hold of my arm, just above the wrist, her hand around it, and for a second she just stood there holding on, not dramatically, not tenderly in any soft way, just the way you hold onto something steady when you've decided it's where you want to be. Then she let go and said, "Show me where you were thinking for the garden." I showed her. That summer, The garden came in slow and too thick in places, and we argued about it twice, which was pleasant in a way I hadn't expected argument to be. She was right both times and said so herself before I got around to saying it, which was annoying. August. There was an evening where the heat had been bad all day and broke around sundown, and we sat on the steps of what I was beginning to think of as the porch, and she had a glass of something cold, and I had mine, and we didn't talk for a long time. The light went down slow the way it does in that country when it decides to, stretching out purple and then dark orange above the ridge, and somewhere out in the paddock the mare was moving, her hooves easy on the dry ground. I was 61 years old. I'd spent 4 decades with a badge or a gun or both. I'd done what the work required, and I'd been good at it, and I'd been alone in it in a way I'd made my peace with long ago, or thought I had. Marin Dahl was sitting on my porch step in the August dark, her shoulder 3 inches from mine, watching the same light. She said, without looking at me, "You're thinking too loud." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. "Just stop." I did. I looked at the light and then at the dark and then at the horses. I let the evening be what it was. After a while she leaned, just a little, just enough, and her shoulder came against mine, and she left it there. There's not a fancy way to say it. That's just what happened, the weight of it, the warmth of it, a good woman choosing to lean. I didn't move, I didn't say anything. I sat there in the dark with the horses settling in for the night, and the garden she'd been right about twice growing where we'd argued over it, and Marin Dahl's shoulder against mine, and the whole long shape of my life behind me. It felt like what it was, it felt like enough. It felt like the only place in the world I had any business being.